She built empires from shattered glass, but his quiet strength cracked her flawless facade, a love as dangerous as it was inevitable. Hello, beautiful souls. I'm Morgan, your guide through tales where hearts collide and souls ignite. If you crave stories where love blooms, in the unlikeliest shadows, where power meets vulnerability, and where every glance holds a universe of unspoken truths, you're exactly where you need to be. This isn't just a romance, it's a reckoning, a dance between control and surrender, where two worlds collide, and not even the protagonists see the storm coming. Hit subscribe, lean in, and let's unravel a love story that'll leave you breathless. Ready? Let's begin. Chapter 1. The silence in the penthouse wasn't peaceful. It was glacial. Polished obsidian floors reflected the weak, pre-dawn light filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows, turning the vast space into a cavern of cold reflections. Leila Adebayo stood at the edge of this abyss, a silhouette against the awakening cityscape far below. The air tasted sterile, filtered and reprocessed, devoid of life, smelling faintly of ozone and expensive, unscented cleaning products. She wore not sleepwear, but a precisely tailored silk robe the color of midnight, cinched tightly at her waist. Her bare feet registered the shocking chill of the stone beneath them, a sensation she welcomed. It grounded her, a small controlled pain. Click, click, click. The sharp, precise sound of her heels striking marble echoed unnaturally loud as she crossed the living room towards her dressing room. Each step was a punctuation mark in the emptiness. She avoided the large abstract painting on the far wall, a swirl of violent reds and blacks she'd commissioned in a fit of post-event defiance. Now it just felt like a wound. The dressing room was a temple to control. Rows of immaculate suits, charcoal, navy, onyx hung like armor, bespoke blouses, starched and severe, jewelry rested on black velvet in precise formations. Her reflection in the full-length mirror was flawless, skin like deep, polished mahogany, cheekbones sculpted by a master, eyes the color of dark roast coffee, intelligent and impenetrable. Her hair, a crown of tight, intricate braids pulled back severely, not a strand daring to escape. Yet beneath the surface, a phantom ache pulsed. It wasn't in her body, but somewhere deeper, a hollow resonance left by the deafening silence of 500 guests, the blinding white of a dress hitting cold stone, the choked gasp that had ripped from her throat before iron control slammed down. Control, maintain, contain, the mantra was etched onto her bones. The sleek elevator descended silently, carrying her down from her icy eyrie. The transition was jarring. The polished chrome and cool air of the penthouse gave way to the bustling, slightly chaotic energy of Adebayo Architectural Associates headquarters. Her entrance was a wave freezing motion. The low hum of computers, the murmur of hushed conversations, the scent of coffee and printer toner, it all stuttered and died as she walked through the open-plan space. Eyes darted away, shoulders stiffened. Her presence commanded silence, a respect edged with fear. She was Leila Adebayo, the phoenix who'd rebuilt her family's crumbling empire into a global powerhouse from the ashes of public humiliation. Ruthless, brilliant, untouchable, the click of her heels became a metronome, measuring the tension. Her office was a glass cage, overlooking the manicured grounds of the Adebayo estate, her sanctuary and her prison. The view was perfection. Geometric lawns, sculpted hedges, ornamental trees placed with mathematical precision, order imposed upon nature. It mirrored the state of her mind, or what she demanded her mind be. She sat behind the vast obsidian desk, the surface bare except for a single, cutting-edge tablet. Her first executive assistant, Marcus, materialized silently, placing a crystal glass of ice water precisely within her reach, followed by a tablet displaying the day's brutal schedule. "Miss Adebayo," Marcus murmured, his voice carefully neutral. "The Heathrow expansion projections are flagged. Environmental impact concerns from the Surrey Council, and Mr. Vance from Acquisitions is agitated." Leila didn't look up. "Flagged projections mean insufficient data or flawed modeling. Fix it. Surrey Council concerns a noise. Handle it. Vance can agitate in his own office until he has a solution, not a complaint. Schedule him for 5 minutes this afternoon." Dismissed. The silence returned, thicker now, charged with the weight of decisions that shaped cities and broke careers. Leila scrolled through reports, her expression impassive. Numbers, graphs, blueprints. These were languages she understood, predictable, controllable, unlike the treacherous landscape of the human heart. A flicker of movement in the periphery of her vision snagged her attention. Down on the estate grounds, near the dilapidated Victorian greenhouse that was a relic of her grandfather's more sentimental era, a figure moved. Ethan Reed, the new head groundskeeper, hired by the estate manager, vetted by security, approved by her with barely a glance weeks ago, just another necessary functionary, part of the estate's machinery. Yet, now, he drew her gaze like a flaw in an otherwise perfect blueprint. He wasn't tending the manicured lawns. He was wrestling with the overgrown jungle, threatening to consume the greenhouse. She watched, her focus momentarily stolen from a multi-million-pound contract dispute. He moved with a deliberate, unhurried grace that contrasted sharply with the frantic energy of her corporate world. Sunlight, weak but persistent, glinted off the blade of his shears as he cleared thickets of bramble. His shoulders, broad under a faded, sun-bleached work shirt, shifted with easy strength. There was an earthiness to him, a grounded solidity that felt alien in her rarefied atmosphere. He paused, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of a calloused hand, and looked up, seemingly directly at her tower window. Leila instinctively leaned back, deeper into the shadow of her office, a flush of heat prickling her neck. Ridiculous, he can't see you. But the sense of being observed, truly seen, lingered unsettlingly. Hours dissolved in the crucible of mergers and acquisitions. A tense, unsatisfactory call with the Surrey Council left a familiar metallic taste of frustration in her mouth. She needed air, or the illusion of it. Leaving the glass cage, she descended through the building, the weight of her title pressing down with each floor. Stepping outside onto the rear terrace was like entering a different world. The air, though still cool, carried the damp green scent of earth and growing things, a shock after the sterile indoors. The distant hum of traffic was replaced by bird song and the rustle of leaves. Her eyes were drawn magnetically to the greenhouse. Driven by a compulsion she refused to name, Leila walked. Her heels sank slightly into the manicured lawn as she deviated from the paved paths, drawn towards the wilder edge where the greenhouse stood. The closer she got, the louder the sensory symphony became. The damp, rich smell of loam, the sharp tang of crushed herbs, the sweet perfume of unseen blossoms. The air grew warmer, thicker, near the old glass structure. She paused at the entrance, partially obscured by a riot of untamed clematis. Inside, Ethan was a study in focused tranquility. He stood before a long, cluttered potting bench, his back to her, repotting something. Sunlight streamed through the dusty, rain-streaked panes, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the humid air. It caught the gold and copper highlights in his sandy brown hair, cut short but unruly at the temples. His rolled-up sleeves revealed forearms dusted with fine, lighter hair and marked by faint scratches and old scars, strong tendons shifting beneath suntanned skin as he worked the soil. His hands, they moved with surprising delicacy for their size and apparent roughness, coaxing roots into fresh earth, patting the soil gently around the stem of a plant she couldn't name. It was an orchid, she realized as he shifted, its petals a startling velvety purple against the muted greens and browns. He hummed, a low, tuneless sound that vibrated in the quiet space, completely absorbed. This quiet communion with life, this patient nurturing, it was the antithesis of her world of steel, glass, and ruthless negotiation. It felt dangerous, vulnerable. She must have made a sound, a faint intake of breath, the scrape of her heel on the flagstone path. He stilled, not abruptly, but the humming ceased. He slowly turned, wiping his hands on a cloth tucked into his worn work trousers. His eyes, a clear, startling hazel flecked with green and gold, met hers. There was no deference, no flinching away, only a calm, direct assessment that momentarily stripped her of her CEO armor. He looked at her, not up to her. Sunlight caught the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, lines earned by squinting into the light, not boardroom stress. Miss Adebayo. His voice was a warm baritone, quiet but resonant in the glass chamber. It held neither fear nor unctuousness. Didn't expect company in the jungle. Lurzel found her voice, cool and precise, a shield hastily raised. Mr. Reed, I was surveying the estate. A blatant lie. This structure is in significant disrepair. I was unaware restoration was part of your remit. She gestured vaguely at the chaos of plants, tools, and crumbling brickwork. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. It wasn't mocking. It held a hint of shared understanding of the greenhouse's state. The formal gardens run themselves, mostly. This. He looked around, his gaze sweeping over the tangled beauty. This felt like it needed saving, neglected potential. His eyes flickered back to hers, holding them for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Unless you'd prefer it bulldozed. The directness was disarming, so was the implication. Neglected potential. The phrase echoed uncomfortably within her. Bulldozing seems wasteful, she stated, stepping cautiously inside. The humidity wrapped around her like a warm, damp cloak. The scent intensified. Earth, chlorophyll, something faintly citrusy. But cost-benefit analyses exist for a reason. Sentimentality is poor business. Is it? He turned back to the orchid, gently adjusting a leaf. Sometimes the most valuable things aren't immediately profitable. Take this phalaenopsis. Looks fragile, right? All showy petals. He traced a velvety bloom with a fingertip, a gesture surprisingly tender.
But it's tougher than it looks, resilient. Given the right conditions, neglected for years, it can still come back spectacularly. He glanced at her again, that hazel gaze steady. Just needs someone willing to see past the neglect, and maybe get their hands dirty. Leila felt a flush creep up her neck. Was he talking about the orchid, the greenhouse? The metaphor felt perilously close to something else entirely. His words were innocuous on the surface, yet they resonated with an unsettling depth. She watched his hands, the care in his touch. Life, unbidden, uncontrolled, like the betrayal, smother it. She tightened her own hands into fists, her nails digging into her palms, grounding herself with that small, sharp pain. Resilience is admirable, she conceded, her voice tighter than intended. But control is paramount. Chaos is inefficient. He chuckled softly, a warm, low sound that seemed to vibrate in the humid air. Chaos is just nature's way of reminding us we're not actually in control, Miss Adebayo. No matter how fancy the office, he gestured towards the main house with his trowel. These plants, they thrive on a certain amount of unpredictability. Too much order stifles them. The sheer audacity of him, lecturing her on control in her greenhouse, on her estate, sparked a flicker of irritation. But it was tangled with something else, a reluctant fascination. My boardroom thrives on predictability, Mr. Reed. Stray variables cost millions. And yet, he said, moving to a different bench where seedlings struggled in tiny pots, here you are, in the chaos. He didn't look at her as he said it, focusing on watering the tiny plants with a small can. The gentle patter of water on soil was the only sound for a moment. Must be something compelling about it. She had no ready retort. He was right. She was here, drawn inexplicably to this humid, disordered space, to the quiet intensity of this man who dared to speak plainly. It felt like a crack in her meticulously constructed fortress. She needed to retreat. See that the perimeter hedges are trimmed by Friday, she said abruptly, turning towards the exit. The scent of damp earth and bruised leaves clung to her. Of course, Miss Adebayo. His voice followed her. Enjoy the order. The cool air outside hit her like a physical blow after the greenhouse's embrace. She walked briskly back towards the sterile sanctuary of her office, the image of his hands, gentle on the orchid, stubbornly replacing the blueprints in her mind. Control, maintain, contain. The mantra felt less solid than before. Days bled into a week. The Surrey Council issue escalated, morphing into a public relations headache. A crucial negotiation for a prime London development site hit an unexpected snag. The familiar crushing pressure built behind Leila's temples. Her world felt brittle, the meticulously maintained order threatening to fracture. She found herself standing at her window more frequently, gaze drifting past the perfect lawns towards the greenhouse. Sometimes she saw Ethan's figure moving within the green shadows, a solitary, steady presence. One morning, arriving in her obsidian office before dawn, she stopped short. Centered perfectly on her otherwise immaculate desk, beside her tablet, sat a single stem in a simple glass of water. Not an orchid this time, a sprig of jasmine, tiny star-like white blooms against deep green leaves. Its fragrance was intoxicating, sweet and heady, cutting through the sterile air, filling the space with an undeniable living presence. There was no note, it didn't need one, she knew. Her first instinct was fury, an intrusion, an unsolicited disruption of her sterile environment. She reached to sweep it into the bin. Her fingers hovered over the delicate stem. The scent enveloped her, unexpectedly calming the frantic buzz of anxiety humming beneath her skin. It was wild, untamed beauty, neglected potential. His words whispered back. With a sharp intake of breath, she withdrew her hand. She left it there, a tiny fragrant rebellion on the field of black glass. Every time she looked at it, a traitorous warmth bloomed in her chest. Later that afternoon, needing a reprieve from financial forecasts that seemed determined to bleed red, she walked the grounds again, not towards the greenhouse this time, but towards a secluded stone bench nestled beneath a giant ancient oak at the far edge of the formal gardens. It was her hidden viewpoint, a place she rarely visited anymore. As she approached, she saw him, Ethan. He was crouched near the bench, his back to her. He straightened as she neared, wiping his hands on his trousers. Miss Adebayo. There was no surprise in his voice this time, only that calm acknowledgement. She stopped, maintaining distance. Mr. Reed. Her gaze fell to the bench. One of the large weathered stone slabs that formed the seat had been cracked, likely by winter frost or the roots of the old oak. It now sat perfectly level. Fresh mortar, still dark, sealed the repair. It was meticulous work, blending seamlessly with the aged stone. Found it like that, he said simply, following her gaze. Seemed a shame. Good spot to sit. Quiet. He picked up his tools, a trowel, a small level, and placed them in a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. You repaired it. It wasn't a question. The care was evident. He shrugged, a fluid movement of those broad shoulders. Had the materials. Seemed. He looked at her, then past her, towards the greenhouse, visible in the distance through the trees. Like the jasmine. It's a rogue climber near the compost. Tough little thing. Smells like heaven, though. His eyes met hers again, holding that direct, unnerving gaze. A faint, knowing smile played on his lips. Thought it could use a better stage than a pile of rotting vegetable scraps. The intimacy of that knowledge, unspoken but acknowledged, was startling. She glanced at the repaired bench, then back at him. The late afternoon sun gilded his hair, catching the lighter strands. The scent of cut grass and warm earth clung to him. "You have a habit," she said, her voice cooler than she felt, "of inserting unexpected variables into ordered systems, Mr. Reed." His smile deepened, crinkling the corners of his eyes. It transformed his face, revealing a warmth, a latent charm that was devastatingly unexpected. "Life's full of unexpected variables, Miss Adebayo." Sometimes, he took a step closer, not invading her space but diminishing the distance significantly. "They're the only things that make the order worthwhile." He gestured towards the bench. "Enjoy the quiet. Sun's good here this time of day." He moved past her, close enough that she caught the full, earthy, sun-warmed scent of him. Soil, grass, clean sweat, and something uniquely him. The heat radiating from his body was palpable in the cool shade of the oak. Her breath hitched. He paused, just for a fraction of a second, his hazel eyes scanning her face, seeming to note the slight dilation of her pupils, the faint tension in her jaw. A flicker of something intense, something purely male and appreciative, passed through his gaze before he masked it with his usual calm. It was a look that bypassed her CEO title, her armor, and touched the woman beneath. Then he nodded once, a silent, respectful acknowledgement that nonetheless felt charged, and walked away, his boots making soft sounds on the grass. Leila remained frozen for a long moment after he disappeared. The air felt thick, charged with an energy she couldn't name but vibrated through her. She looked at the repaired bench. Worthwhile, she looked towards the greenhouse, a green jewel shimmering in the distance. Neglected potential. She touched the spot on her arm where his heat had radiated mere inches away. The jasmine scent seemed to follow her, even out here. The fortress walls, meticulously maintained for years, didn't just have cracks, they felt the sterile order of her world seemed suddenly suffocating. The forbidden attraction wasn't a spark, it was a slow, insistent seepage, like water finding the weakest point in stone. And the most terrifying part, a tiny traitorous part of her was leaning towards the warmth, the scent, the quiet challenge in those hazel eyes. Control, maintain, contain, the mantra echoed, but it sounded hollow against the sudden vibrant hum of life, stirring within her own carefully frozen heart. She didn't sit on the bench. She turned and walked swiftly back towards the cold, safe sterility of her glass tower, the ghost of his warmth, his scent, and his unsettlingly perceptive words clinging to her like the jasmine's perfume. The battle lines were drawn, not on a boardroom table but deep within her own soul, and the enemy was disarmingly gentle, smelled of earth and sunlight, and possessed hands that coaxed life from the most neglected things.
Chapter 2. The jasmine on Leila's obsidian desk wilted, its starry blooms turning brown at the edges, its once heady fragrance fading to a ghostly sweetness. Yet, she couldn't bring herself to discard it. Its presence, a silent, stubborn reminder of the humid greenhouse and the man who'd placed it there, felt like a tiny fissure in the glacial plane of her control. She'd find herself staring at it during tense conference calls, her fingers tracing the cool edge of the glass, the phantom scent momentarily overriding the sterile air. Neglected potential. The words echoed, a persistent hum beneath the drone of quarterly reports. The Surrey Council issue metastasized. What began as environmental noise erupted into a full-blown media storm. Local news outlets painted Adebayo architectural as a heartless corporate bulldozer, indifferent to ancient woodlands and community concerns. Leila's meticulously crafted image of icy competence was splashed across tabloids, alongside unflattering photos, the subtext screaming, "Ice Queen melts under pressure." The metallic taste of frustration became a constant companion, sharp and acrid on her tongue. The Heathrow expansion projections remained stubbornly flagged, a blinking red light on her tablet that mocked her command. Control felt like sand slipping through her clenched fists. Seeking refuge, or perhaps punishment, Leila found her feet carrying her towards the greenhouse more frequently. It became a morbid pilgrimage, drawn to the source of her disquiet. Each visit was a sensory assault after the filtered sterility of her world. The humid air, thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the cloying sweetness of unseen blooms, clung to her skin and closed like a second living skin. The cacophony of life, the rustle of leaves, the drone of insects trapped against the glass, the occasional drip of water, was a stark counterpoint to the hushed tension of her office. She'd arrive silently, often finding Ethan deep in his work. He never acknowledged her immediately, a courtesy that felt like tacit permission to observe. She watched the deliberate economy of his movements, the flex of muscle in his forearm as he pruned a stubborn vine, the careful pressure of his thumb and forefinger pinching off dead leaves, the patient untangling of roots from an overgrown pot. There was a deep, unspoken knowledge in his hands, a communion with the living things he tended that felt alien and unsettlingly intimate. One afternoon she stood near the entrance as he wrestled with a particularly dense thicket of spider plants choking an antique wrought iron stand. Sunlight streamed through the dusty glass, catching the fine sheen of sweat on his temple, the concentration etched between his brows. "Chaos seems to be winning today, Mr. Reed," she observed, her voice cooler than she felt. The humidity was making the silk of her blouse cling uncomfortably to her back. He didn't look up immediately, carefully extracting a long runner. "Depends on your perspective, Miss Adebayo." His voice was calm, a low rumble that vibrated pleasantly in the close air. He finally glanced at her, hazel eyes assessing the thicket. "This isn't chaos. It's just enthusiastic life. Needs direction, not eradication." He snipped a runner, the sound sharp in the stillness. "Like some boardroom negotiations, I imagine. All tangled agendas and competing routes." The analogy, so casually delivered, struck a nerve. Her recent negotiations had felt exactly like that, a snarled mess of competing interests. The Surrey Council was a particularly thorny vine. Negotiations involve leverage and strategy, she countered, stepping cautiously further inside. The scent of bruised mint rose as her heel crushed a stray leaf. "Not gardening." He straightened, wiping his brow with the back of his wrist, leaving a faint smudge of soil. A faint smile touched his lips. "Isn't strategy just knowing where to cut, Miss Adebayo? Where to prune for the health of the whole? And leverage?" He picked up a small trowel, testing its weight. "Sometimes leverage is just patience, letting things grow until they're strong enough to support the weight you need them to bear." His gaze held hers, steady and disarmingly perceptive. Or knowing when a little selective pressure encourages a desired outcome. Leila felt a flush creep up her neck. Was he talking about plants, negotiations, or the subtle, unnerving pressure of his quiet presence in her life? "Selective pressure often breaks weaker elements," she stated, her voice tighter, "or strengthens them," he countered softly, turning back to the plants. "Forces adaptation, resilience." He gently lifted a cluster of tangled spider plant babies. "See? Too crowded. They choke each other. Separate them. Give them space. Light. They thrive." He carefully pulled a small cluster free, its tiny roots pale and vulnerable. Neglect isn't the only enemy. Sometimes it's crowding. Too many demands. Not enough room to breathe. He placed the cluster into a fresh pot of dark, rich soil. His fingers brushed against hers as he reached for a nearby watering can. It was the briefest contact, callous skin against her knuckles, radiating warmth, but it jolted through her like static. She snatched her hand back, the sensation lingering like a brand. He sees the cracks. He sees the ruin beneath the marble. Does he see the wanting? Stop it. Control is all. Yet she lingered, rooted by the humid air and the unsettling intimacy of his metaphor. She watched his hands pat the soil around the newly potted plant, a gesture of profound care. Her own hands, usually so decisive, felt useless, cold. The contrast was agonizing. The walk back to her office was a blur of conflicting sensations. The cool breeze felt abrasive after the greenhouse's embrace, yet the phantom warmth on her knuckles persisted. Inside her glass cage, the blinking Heathrow projections and the headlines screaming about Surrey felt trivial compared to the memory of tangled roots and the heat of a fleeting touch. Later, during a vitriolic call with the head of the Surrey Council, she snapped. Her voice, usually a scalpel, became a hammer. "Your sentimental obstructionism is costing this project millions, Councillor Davies. Your precious ancient woodland is a glorified thicket, documented only since 1952. Either provide viable alternatives by end of day, or prepare for litigation that will make your re-election bid look like a school picnic." She slammed the phone down, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. Marcus, delivering updated reports, froze in the doorway, eyes wide. Leila took a shuddering breath, the image of Ethan patiently untangling vines flooding her mind, a stark rebuke to her own loss of control. The flush on her neck felt like failure. Retreat was her only option. She fled the office, the weight of her outburst pressing down on her. The sky had darkened, heavy with unshed rain, mirroring her internal storm. Instead of the penthouse, its sterile perfection suddenly unbearable, she found herself walking towards the stone bench beneath the ancient oak. It was dusk, the air thick with the promise of rain and the scent of ozone. She needed the quiet, the solidity of the old stone Ethan had repaired. Worthwhile. Rounding the massive trunk, she stopped. He was there, not sitting, but crouched beside the bench, examining something on the ground. The fading light caught the planes of his face, the focused intensity in his expression as he gently prodded the earth with a trowel.
He looked up as her shadow fell across him, his hazel eyes reflecting the bruised purple of the twilight sky. There was no surprise, only that quiet watchfulness. Miss Adebayo, he rose slowly, wiping his hands on his trousers. Evenings drawing in, storms brewing. Indeed, she managed, her voice raw from shouting. She gestured towards the bench. I came for the quiet, and the solidity. Her gaze dropped to where he'd been working. What demands your attention now? He stepped aside, revealing a patch of disturbed earth near the base of the bench. Nestled within it lay a cluster of tiny pale bulbs. Snowdrops, he said simply. Found them buried deep. Must have been planted years ago. Forgotten. They won't bloom for months, but he crouched again, his movements economical and sure. They needed to be uncovered. Given a chance. Too deep they'd rot. He carefully arranged the bulbs, covering them with a layer of loose soil. Sometimes things get buried. Doesn't mean they're gone. Just waiting for the right conditions to push through. The metaphor was too direct, too poignant. Buried things, forgotten potential, rotting in the dark. The image of her own carefully entombed emotions, the humiliation, the betrayal, rose like bile. The pressure behind her eyes, held back for years, became unbearable. She turned away sharply, a strangled sound escaping her lips. Her shoulder brushed against a low-hanging branch, dislodging a shower of cold raindrops that spattered her face, mingling with the treacherous heat welling in her eyes. Don't. Not here. Not now. Not in front of him. She stumbled back a step, her heel catching on an exposed root. His hand shot out, steadying her elbow. It wasn't a hesitant touch. It was firm, grounding, the warmth of his palm searing through the thin silk of her blouse. Easy. His voice was low, close to her ear. The roots here are tenacious. She flinched, pulling her arm away as if burned, but the damage was done. His touch, his proximity, the raw vulnerability of her near tears. It shattered her remaining composure. She spun to face him, the rain now falling in earnest, cool drops tracing paths down her heated cheeks. Tenacious. The word came out brittle, edged with hysteria, like unwanted weeds, like stubborn memories. She gestured wildly towards the house, towards her office tower, like problems that refuse to be solved cleanly, efficiently, like feelings that won't be contained. The words hung in the damp air, shocking in their raw honesty. Rain plastered strands of hair to her forehead, dripped from the tip of her nose. She was exposed, not just to the elements, but to his quiet, penetrating gaze. He didn't look shocked, he looked sad and understanding. The rain darkened his shirt, plastering it to the solid planes of his chest and shoulders. He didn't retreat, he took a half step closer, closing the distance she'd tried to create. The scent of rain, wet earth, and his own warm, clean skin enveloped her. Feelings aren't weeds, Leila, he said, the use of her first name a deliberate, gentle detonation in the space between them. They're more like these. He gestured towards the freshly covered snowdrop bulbs. Buried deep maybe, forgotten, but they exist, trying to contain them. He shook his head slowly, rain dripping from his lashes. That's what causes the rot, the explosion. His hazel eyes held hers, reflecting the stormy twilight and a depth of emotion that stole her breath. Sometimes the storm has to break before anything new can grow. The truth of it, delivered in his low, resonant voice amidst the drumming rain, was a physical blow. Her carefully constructed fortress, already weakened by his quiet persistence and the external pressures, crumbled. She stood there, soaked and shivering, not from cold, but from the terrifying vulnerability of being truly seen. The resolve to maintain absolute control. The iron wall she'd built after the altar, shattered like the terracotta pot in the greenhouse. What remained was a raw, aching openness, a terrifying desire for the warmth radiating from him, for the understanding in his eyes, for the promise of growth after the storm. The rain washed over them, blurring the lines between employer and employee, between her sterile order and his vibrant chaos, leaving only two people standing in the downpour, the unspoken tension crackling like lightning in the charged air. Control was gone, only the storm, and him, remained. The rain continued into the night, a steady drumming against the penthouse windows. Leila stood at the glass, wrapped in a thick robe, watching the city lights blur and shimmer through the wet panes. She didn't see the skyline. She saw the rain slicking his sandy hair, the intensity in his hazel eyes, the firm warmth of his hand on her arm. She felt the echo of his words. Feelings aren't weeds. Sometimes the storm has to break. Sleep was impossible. The sterile silence of the penthouse felt oppressive, a vacuum after the sensory overload of the storm and his presence. Her skin still tingled where he'd touched her. The phantom scent of wet earth and him clung to her senses, stronger than any memory of expensive perfume. The carefully compartmentalized boxes of her life felt ruptured. Surrey, Heathrow, the boardroom. They receded into a dull background hum. Ethan Reed, the quiet groundskeeper, occupied the foreground with startling, undeniable clarity. The next morning dawned clear and washed clean. The air held a crispness that felt new. Leila dressed mechanically, choosing a charcoal suit, her armor, but the reflection in the mirror was different. The usual impenetrable mask felt thin, fragile. Shadows lingered under her eyes, but there was a new awareness in her gaze, a vulnerability she couldn't hide. She avoided the obsidian desk, its emptiness a reminder of the wilted jasmine she'd finally discarded before leaving last night. Descending to her office, the familiar tension greeted her, the hushed voices, the averted glances. Marcus presented the day's disasters. Surrey had escalated to formal complaints. Heathrow projections remained disastrous. A key investor was expressing concerns amplified by the tabloid frenzy. The metallic taste of frustration returned, but it was duller now, overlaid with a strange detachment. She issued commands, handled the crises with her usual sharp intellect, but her heart wasn't in the cut and thrust. Her mind kept drifting to the damp earth, the uncovered bulbs, the way the rain had plastered his shirt to his skin. Mid-morning, driven by a compulsion she no longer fought, she walked out towards the greenhouse. The storm had left its mark. Puddles reflected the clear blue sky. Leaves lay scattered, glistening. The scent of petrichor, wet stone and earth, was intoxicating. As she neared the greenhouse, she saw him. He was already assessing the damage, moving slowly around the structure, running a hand along the old brickwork, peering up at the glass roof. His work shirt was damp in patches, clinging to his back. The formality was back, a careful wall after the intimacy of the rain. Mr. Reed. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze sweeping over the greenhouse. A few panes were cracked, leaves and small branches littered the ground inside, visible through the glass. The storm left its mark. He nodded, following her gaze. It did. Nothing structural, I think. Just a bit of a mess. Nature reminding us who's boss. He bent to pick up a broken terracotta pot, the same kind she'd shattered weeks ago. He examined the pieces. Some things broke. Her eyes met his. The memory of her own shattering resolve, witnessed by him in the rain, hung heavy in the air. Yes, she said, her voice quiet. Some things did. She took a step closer, drawn despite herself. The scent of damp earth and clean sweat was stronger here. Can it be fixed? The damage. He looked at her, really looked at her, his hazel eyes searching her face, seeming to see the new cracks, the vulnerability laid bare. Most things can be fixed, Miss Adebayo, he said slowly, with time and care. He gestured towards the greenhouse door. Want to survey the chaos? It was an invitation, a stepping over a threshold far more significant than the physical one. Leila hesitated for only a heartbeat. Control was shattered. The storm had broken. What came next was terrifyingly unknown. She met his gaze, seeing not pity, but a quiet understanding, and perhaps a shared anticipation. Yes, she said, her voice firmer now. Show me the chaos, Mr. Reed. He held the door open for her. The humid, earthy air, intensified by the rain, enveloped her as she stepped inside. The mess was worse than it looked from outside. Scattered soil, broken stems, puddles on the flagstones, but the life within seemed to pulse stronger, greener, as if energized by the storm. Ethan moved beside her, his presence a solid anchor in the disarray. He picked up a fallen vine, its leaves bruised but resilient. See? He murmured, his voice warm in the close space, a bit battered, but still growing. He held the vine out towards her, his eyes holding hers, stronger for the storm maybe. The unspoken tension wasn't gone, it had transformed. It was no longer a battle line, but a current, powerful and undeniable, flowing between them in the rain-washed, life-filled air of the greenhouse. The fortress was breached, the thaw had begun, and the terrifying, exhilarating journey into the heart of the chaos, guided by his calloused hand, was just beginning. The resolve was shattered. What remained was the raw, terrifying, exhilarating potential of what might grow in the wreckage.
Chapter 3. The shared space within the greenhouse, thick with the scent of rain-drenched earth and bruised foliage, hummed with a new, almost unbearable frequency. Leila's agreement to survey the chaos hadn't been about horticulture. It was surrender. A white flag raised not to the storm's aftermath, but to the tempest Ethan Reed had unleashed within her. The carefully constructed dam had burst, and the floodwaters of long-suppressed emotion, terrifying desire, and raw vulnerability surged, leaving her exposed before the quiet man picking up shards of terracotta. He worked methodically, gathering broken pots, righting overturned seedlings, his movements economical and sure. Leila stood motionless, a statue in her rain-dampened silk blouse and tailored trousers, feeling utterly useless, adrift in the humid disarray. Her usual arsenal, commands, strategies, icy detachment, was useless here. This was a realm of patience, tactile knowledge, and quiet resilience, embodied in the flex of Ethan's back muscles beneath his damp shirt as he lifted a heavy sack of spilled compost. "Don't just stand there looking lost, Miss Adebayo," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in the close air. He didn't look up, carefully brushing soil from the roots of a toppled fern. "Chaos management requires participation. Hand me that broom." The request, so mundane, yet so intimate in its implication of shared labor, jolted her. She spotted the broom leaning against a rusty watering can. Crossing the uneven flagstones, she picked it up, the rough wooden handle unfamiliar against her palm. She handed it to him. Their fingers didn't touch, but the proximity, the scent of damp earth and clean sweat clinging to him, the heat radiating from his body, was a tangible force. "Thank you," he murmured, finally meeting her eyes. His hazel gaze held no triumph, only a deep, steady watchfulness that seemed to see straight through her fragile composure to the raw nerve endings beneath. He began sweeping broken glass and debris into a neat pile, starting with the hazards. "Can't have you cutting those expensive shoes," or, he added, a ghost of a smile touching his lips, "more importantly, yourself." Leila watched the rhythmic motion of the broom, the way his forearms chorded with the effort. "My shoes are replaceable," she found herself saying, the words surprising her. Vulnerability felt like walking on broken glass itself. He paused, leaning on the broom handle. "Are they?" His gaze swept over her, lingering for a heartbeat on her designer heels, then traveling slowly up to meet her eyes again. "They look like part of the armor, shiny, impenetrable, designed to intimidate." He resumed sweeping, his tone conversational. "Down here, armor tends to get muddy, or snagged on thorns." Was he flirting, challenging, offering wisdom? The ambiguity was maddening, intoxicating. "Perhaps some armor is necessary," she countered, her voice steadier than she felt. She gestured vaguely at the mess. "Protection against unforeseen damage." "Adebayo, look." He pointed the broom handle towards a cluster of orchids near a shattered pane. Rainwater still dripped from the damaged glass onto the vibrant purple blooms, making them glisten like jewels. They got a direct hit. Too much water, too much force. Yet, he stepped closer to them, his voice dropping. "See how they hold the water, like tears, makes the color deeper, more alive." He glanced back at her, his eyes holding hers. "Sometimes the storm doesn't break things. It reveals their strength, their capacity to hold more." The metaphor struck her with the force of a physical blow. Capacity to hold more. Was he talking about the orchids? Or her? The intensity in his gaze suggested the latter. Heat flooded her cheeks, unrelated to the greenhouse humidity. She looked away, focusing on a puddle reflecting the fractured light. "Orchids are notoriously fragile, and notoriously resilient," he countered immediately, moving closer still. He stood beside her now, looking down at the orchids. She could feel the warmth of his arm inches from hers. "They adapt. They find a way to thrive, even in cracks, even after neglect." He turned his head slightly towards her. His voice was a low murmur, barely audible over the drip of water. "Like neglected potential." Her breath caught. He'd used the phrase again, the one that had first pierced her armor weeks ago. This time, it wasn't an observation about a greenhouse. It was a direct address to her soul. She turned her head, meeting his gaze. The air crackled. The humid space seemed to shrink, pressing them closer. The scent of wet earth, bruised orchids, and him was overwhelming. She saw the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, the faint stubble darkening his jaw, the pulse beating steadily at the base of his throat. The unspoken tension wasn't just present. It was a living, breathing entity between them. "Ethan," his name slipped out, a raw whisper, devoid of title, a surrender in itself. A muscle flickered in his jaw. His gaze dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second, so fast she might have imagined it, but the heat in his eyes intensified. "Leila," he breathed, the sound rough, intimate. He didn't move, but his stillness was charged, a coiled spring. The storm, it cleared the air, didn't it? The world narrowed to the space between their bodies, the humid air thick with promise and peril. He lifted his hand, slowly, deliberately, not to touch her face, but to gently brush a stray, rain-dampened braid that had escaped its severe knot back from her temple. The calloused pad of his thumb grazed her skin. It was the lightest touch, yet it sent an electric jolt through her entire being. Her eyes fluttered shut for a second, a soft gasp escaping her lips. When she opened them, his face was closer. His gaze was dark, intense, searching hers for permission, for denial. The silence stretched, taut and resonant, filled only by the frantic beating of her own heart and the persistent drip, drip, drip of rainwater. The years of control, the icy fortress, the buried pain, it all dissolved in the heat of that look, in the rough tenderness of his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. Resolve didn't just shatter, it vaporized. He closed the infinitesimal distance.
The first brush of his lips against hers was tentative, questioning, soft, yet carrying the weight of months of suppressed longing and silent observation. It was sunlight, after a long winter, warm earth yielding to rain. Leila froze for a heartbeat, stunned by the sheer rightness of it, the terrifying sweetness. Then instinct, long buried, surged. Her hands trembling, came up to clutch the damp fabric of his work shirt, not to push away, but to anchor herself as the world tilted. She kissed him back. It wasn't gentle for long. The tentative exploration ignited into something fierce, consuming, his arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him, erasing any remaining space, the feel of his solid body against hers, the heat radiating through their clothes, the demanding pressure of his mouth. It was a revelation. Her carefully maintained world of order and control evaporated in the humid chaos of the greenhouse. This was raw, elemental, a force of nature as undeniable as the storm that had brought them here. His kiss was deep, searching, tasting of rain and something uniquely, essentially him. She responded in kind, her fingers tangling in the damp hair at his nape, pulling him closer, surrendering completely to the wildfire spreading through her veins. Time lost meaning. There was only the slick heat of his mouth on hers, the scrape of his stubble against her skin, the possessive strength of his arms holding her, the desperate clutch of her hands on his back. The scent of orchids and damp earth mingled with the salt-sweet taste of him. Sounds faded, the dripping water, the rustle of leaves, replaced by the ragged symphony of their breathing, the soft, desperate sounds catching in her throat. He kissed her like a man starved, and she drank him in like parched earth receiving the first monsoon rain. He broke the kiss first, pulling back just enough to rest his forehead against hers, his breathing harsh. His eyes, darkened to near emerald, searched hers, filled with a turbulent mix of wonder, desire, and a flicker of uncertainty. Leila. Her name was a rough caress on his lips. She couldn't form words. Her body thrummed, alive in a way she'd forgotten possible. She traced the line of his jaw with trembling fingers, feeling the scrape of stubble, the solid bone beneath. The reality crashed over her. Ethan Reed, her groundskeeper, kissing her amidst the storm-wrecked greenhouse. The societal chasms, the professional boundaries, the carefully curated image, they seemed laughably distant, irrelevant ruins in the face of this seismic connection. What mattered was the frantic beat of his heart against hers, the possessive weight of his hand splayed on her lower back, the devastating tenderness in his eyes. He dipped his head again, this time pressing a softer, lingering kiss to the corner of her mouth, then tracing a path along her jawline to the sensitive spot below her ear. A shudder racked her body, a soft moan escaping her. "You're trembling," he murmured against her skin, his voice thick. "So are you," she breathed, feeling the fine tremor in the arms encircling her. A low chuckle vibrated in his chest. Touché. He pulled back slightly, just enough to look at her fully. His thumb brushed across her kiss-swollen lips. Was that unforeseen damage or unforeseen beauty? The echo of his earlier words, wrapped in the raw intimacy of the moment, shattered the last remnants of her hesitation. A shaky laugh escaped her, surprising them both. "Both," she whispered, her voice husky. "Definitely both." She leaned into his touch, her eyes holding his. The unspoken question hung between them. What now? He answered by kissing her again, slower this time, deeper, a promise and a claiming. The shattered glass and scattered soil around them faded into insignificance. The greenhouse, once a symbol of neglect, became a cathedral of their surrender. The storm outside had passed, but the tempest within, the beautiful, terrifying tempest of their unleashed desire, had only just begun. Control was a forgotten language. They spoke a new one now, wordless and profound, written in the heat of skin, the slide of lips, the desperate clutch of hands, the shared breath in the rain-scented air. The fortress lay in ruins. In its place, amidst the vibrant, resilient life of the greenhouse, bloomed something infinitely more fragile, infinitely more powerful, the terrifying, exhilarating first flower of their bond. The days that followed were a blur, a dreamscape painted in vibrant greens and the warm hues of shared discovery. The physical wreckage of the greenhouse became their shared project, a tangible metaphor for rebuilding. But the rebuilding wasn't just of glass and terracotta. It was of lives, perspectives, and the very fabric of their identities.
Leila found herself drawn to the humid glass sanctuary not out of morbid fascination, but with a quiet, persistent hunger. She arrived early, before the demands of her CEO life could intrude, often finding Ethan already there, the air thick with the scent of coffee he brewed on a small camping stove tucked in a corner. The sight of him, sleeves rolled up, hair damp from an early shower, or the humid air, a smear of soil on his cheek, sent a familiar, delicious jolt through her. "Morning," he'd greet her, his voice warm, holding a new intimacy that still made her pulse stutter. He'd hand her a chipped, steaming mug. Careful, it's strong, like the woman who drinks it. She'd take the mug, their fingers brushing, the simple contact sparking a current. "Strong enough to handle a little chaos, I hope?" She'd retort, a tentative smile playing on her lips. The flirtation felt natural now, a playful dance emerging from the ashes of formality. More than a little, I'd say, he'd counter, his gaze sweeping appreciatively over her. She'd abandoned her power suits for the greenhouse, wearing simple linen trousers and soft cotton shirts that inevitably ended up smudged with dirt. He seemed to take particular pleasure in seeing her pristine elegance yield to the messy vitality of his world. You handled the storm admirably, both kinds. They worked side by side, clearing debris, repotting salvaged plants, carefully cleaning shards of glass from window frames. Leila learned the names of plants, Monstera, Ficus lyrata, the resilient Phalaenopsis orchids. She learned the feel of different soils, the light, airy mix for seedlings, the dense, rich loam for mature plants. She learned the delicate art of handling roots, guided by Ethan's patient instructions, his large calloused hands gently covering hers to demonstrate the right pressure. Gentle, he'd murmur, his breath warm against her ear as he guided her hands around the root ball of a traumatized fern. Like you're holding something precious, which it is. His touch, even in instruction, was charged, a constant, low-level hum of awareness between them. See, it's not about force, it's about understanding what it needs, supporting it. The double entendres were constant, a playful undercurrent to their labor. While mending a broken trellis, sometimes things need a strong framework to climb, he'd say, hammering a nail. Otherwise they sprawl, get lost. Are you referring to the ivy, Mr. Reed? She'd ask, holding the wood steady, or offering unsolicited life coaching. Just observing patterns, Miss Adebayo, he'd reply, a grin tugging at his lips. In plants and people, when she successfully transplanted a fragile seedling without damaging a root, impressive, he'd praise, watching her intently. You've got a surprisingly deft touch. For a CEO, I have hidden talents, she'd shoot back, meeting his gaze, a challenge in her eyes. Oh, I'm discovering them, he'd murmur, his voice dropping, his gaze lingering on her mouth, one by one. The banter was a lifeline, a way to navigate the overwhelming intensity of their newfound intimacy. It allowed them to say dangerous things, wrapped in harmless words, to test boundaries with the safety net of plausible deniability. It was foreplay woven into the mundane act of tying back a vine or mixing potting soil. The stolen moments were the most potent, a hand lingering on the small of her back as he reached for a tool behind her, his thumb brushing a smudge of dirt from her cheekbone, his touch lingering just a fraction too long. The way he'd look at her across the greenhouse, his gaze hot and possessive, stripping away the linen and cotton to the woman beneath, making her skin prickle with awareness even when he was yards away. The way he'd corner her gently against a sturdy potting bench, under the guise of showing her a new bud, his body caging hers, the heat radiating between them, the air crackling until he'd step back with a slow, knowing smile that promised later. The transformation seeped beyond the greenhouse walls. Leila walked through her corporate world with a new awareness. The sterile chill of her penthouse felt alien. She found herself opening a window, letting in the distant sounds of the city and the faint scent of the gardens below. In her obsidian office, a single vibrant orchid, a deep magenta cattleya Ethan had chosen, now sat beside her tablet. Its exotic, spicy fragrance mingled with the ozone, a constant living reminder. Her interactions shifted. The metallic taste of frustration during a difficult negotiation was tempered by the memory of Ethan's calm hands untangling roots. She listened more, sought compromise where she would have dictated. When Marcus presented the latest Surrey hurdle, she didn't snap. She leaned back, her fingers brushing the velvety petal of the orchid. Councillor Davies is passionate about that thicket, she said, a wry twist to her lips. Perhaps passion can be redirected. Find me a local botanist who can document its actual ecological value, not just its sentimental one. Maybe there's a way to integrate it, make it a feature, not an obstacle. Marcus blinked, surprised. Yes, Miss Adebayo, right away. The estate itself began to subtly reflect the shift. Leila noticed Ethan's touch beyond the greenhouse. Near her stone bench beneath the oak, a patch of vibrant bluebells now flourished, where he'd uncovered the snowdrop bulbs. Along a previously rigid border, wildflowers, poppies, cornflowers, daisies were allowed to seed and bloom, a splash of untamed color against the clipped hedges. It wasn't neglect, it was deliberate, a softening of the edges. When she walked past, she'd see him watching her reaction, a question in his eyes. She never commented, but a small, private smile would sometimes touch her lips. He understood. One afternoon, weeks after the storm and the shattering kiss, they were repotting the last of the salvaged orchids. The greenhouse was almost restored, cleaner, brighter, the broken panes replaced, the air still thick with life, but less tinged with disaster. Leila carefully settled an orchid with creamy speckled petals into its new home, patting the soil gently, mimicking Ethan's technique. He watched her, leaning against the newly repaired trellis, arms crossed, a look of quiet intensity on his face. You've become quite the gardener, he observed, his voice soft.
She looked up, meeting his gaze. I had an excellent teacher, one who's surprisingly patient, most of the time. He pushed off the trellis and walked towards her, only with things worth the patience. He stopped close, looking down at the orchid she'd just potted. He reached out, not touching the plant, but tracing a finger along the back of her hand still resting on the soil. The contact sent a familiar jolt up her arm. Some roots, he murmured, his thumb brushing her knuckles. Take time to settle, to feel safe enough to really grow. Oh, her breath hitched. The air between them thickened, heavy with the scent of orchids, and the unspoken weight of everything that had happened. His touch, his words, they weren't just about the plant. They were about her, about them. The playful banter fell away, leaving raw, vulnerable truth. She turned her hand beneath his, lacing her fingers through his calloused ones. The contrast, her smooth skin, his work-roughened palm, was a physical manifestation of their differences, yet the connection felt seamless, essential. Safety, she echoed, her voice barely a whisper. She looked up into his eyes, seeing the reflection of her own vulnerability, her own tentative hope. Is that what this is? Safety? He lifted their joined hands, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. It's a start, he breathed, a place for the roots to take hold. He stepped closer, his free hand coming up to cradle her jaw, his thumb stroking her cheekbone. After the storm, after the shattering, it's the only thing that matters. He kissed her then, not with the fierce desperation of their first kiss in the storm's aftermath, but with a deep, soul-searching tenderness that spoke of belonging, of a bond forged in vulnerability and nurtured in the humid, life-filled sanctuary they'd rebuilt together. The repaired greenhouse stood around them, no longer a symbol of neglect or chaos, but a testament to resilience, to the unexpected beauty that could bloom after the shattering. And as his lips moved softly against hers, Leila knew the control she'd once clung to was gone, replaced by something infinitely more powerful, the terrifying, exhilarating surrender to a love that had reshaped her world, root and branch. This wasn't just repair, this was growth.
Chapter 4. The world had softened, not in the way snowfall softens a city's sharp edges, but in the way sunlight filters through new leaves, casting dappled shadows that shift and breathe. Leila felt it in the air as she stepped onto the penthouse terrace one morning, her phone buzzing insistently in her hand. The call was from Marcus, urgent, about a shareholder revolt over her latest sustainability initiative. Yet instead of the familiar metallic tang of stress, she tasted something else, jasmine. The rogue climber Ethan had saved months ago now, cascaded over her terrace railing, its scent weaving through the urban air. She paused, let the aroma fill her lungs, and silenced the phone. Control was a choice now, not a cage. The journey from greenhouse to boardroom had become a dance of contradictions. Leila still wore her armor, tailored suits, diamond studs, but now they clung to her differently, like second skins rather than shields. In meetings, her voice retained its scalpel-sharp precision, yet her decisions carried a new cadence, a rhythm informed by patience learned in soil-stained afternoons. When the Surrey Council finally relented, it wasn't through litigation, but a partnership with the very botanist she'd commissioned. The woodland would remain, threaded with elevated walkways and eco-lodges designed by a firm owned by the council's most vocal critic. Innovative compromise, the Times called it. Leila called it survival, of ecosystems, egos, and the fragile roots of new love. Ethan's presence in her life was a quiet revolution. No grand gestures, no titles. He came and went like sunlight through the greenhouse panes, constant, warm, unapologetic. Their mornings were spent in the restored glass sanctuary, now a cathedral of thriving green. She'd arrive in linen, her hair braided loosely, her fingers already itching to touch the earth. He'd meet her with coffee in mismatched mugs, his smile a slow dawn. "You're late," he'd tease, handing her a trowel. "The Catalea was starting to doubt your commitment." Once, while pruning a particularly stubborn vine, he'd murmured, "This one's stubborn. Reminds me of someone." She'd arched a brow. "Careful, Mr. Reed. Comparing your CEO to a weed might be hazardous." His laugh had been low, his eyes crinkling. "Not a weed, a resilient hybrid, thrives where others wilt." The vine had ended up in a pot on her desk, a silent joke between them. Manicured lawns gave way to wildflower meadows, their colors bleeding into the formal gardens like watercolor on parchment. The stone bench beneath the oak was flanked by snowdrops and bluebells, their delicate blooms a testament to patience. Guests at her sister's summer gala paused to marvel at the natural beauty, unaware of the hours Ethan had spent nurturing each bulb. Leila watched him from the terrace that evening, his laughter mingling with the jazz quartet as he explained pollination to her youngest niece. His hands, those calloused, earth-stained hands, gestured animatedly, a language older than words. Their nights were a different kind of symphony. In the greenhouse, after the world slept, they'd sit on a reclaimed wooden bench, its surface still rough from Ethan's sanding. She'd lean into him, her head on his shoulder, as he pointed out constellations through the glass roof. "That's Orion," he'd say, his voice a rumble against her ear. "The hunter." She'd trace the stars with her fingertip. "And that one, Venus," he'd murmur, pressing a kiss to her temple. "The goddess of love. Fitting, don't you think?" The Heathrow expansion, once a bleeding ulcer in quarterly reports, became a blueprint for eco-conscious design. Investors balked until she stood before them, unflinching, and laid out profits and reforestation metrics in the same breath. "Sustainability isn't a buzzword," she declared, her gaze steady. "It's survival, for all of us." The room erupted, not in protest, but applause. Marcus hid a smile. Yet, the true transformation lived in the unspoken. The way Ethan's hand found the small of her back in crowded rooms, a grounding touch. The way she'd pause mid-sentence during calls to watch him cross the gardens, her voice trailing off as her heart quickened. The morning she'd arrived at the greenhouse to find him on a ladder, repairing a skylight, her breath had hitched. Sunlight haloed him, sweat gleaming on his neck, muscles taut as he reached overhead. She'd stood there, unnoticed, until he'd glanced down and caught her staring. The smirk he gave her, slow, knowing, made her feel like a debutante at her first ball, all giddy nerves and reckless possibility. One evening, as autumn painted the estate in golds and crimsons, he led her to the heart of the greenhouse. The air was thick with the scent of ripening citrus and damp moss. In the center, where chaos once reigned, stood a young apple tree, its branches heavy with fruit. "Remember the storm?" he asked, plucking an apple and polishing it on his shirt. She nodded, her throat tight. This grew from a seedling that survived the damage, buried under debris but persistent. He offered her the fruit, his eyes holding hers. Some things need the right conditions to thrive. She bit into the apple, the sweetness sharp and real. "And others need a gardener," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. His thumb brushed a drop of juice from her lip, the touch lingering. Snow dusted the greenhouse panes, melted into spring rains, baked into summer gold. Leila's empire expanded, not through conquest, but collaboration. Ethan's gardens became a sanctuary for employees, a place to think, breathe, be. The orchids multiplied, their blooms a riot of color in boardrooms and breakrooms alike. On a morning much like the first, Leila stood at her penthouse window, watching Ethan teach a group of interns how to prune roses. His laugh carried up to her, light and full. Her phone buzzed, a message from the Architectural Review requesting an interview. She set it aside. Below, a gnome fumbled with secateurs, nearly dropping them. Ethan steadied the tool, his hands guiding the young man's. A lesson in patience, a legacy. Roll the sterned. From the window, her gaze falling on the orchid from their first kiss. Its petals were faded now, but new buds swelled at its base. Growth, always growth. She slipped on her coat, the one Ethan had given her for Christmas, wool, practical, smelling of cedar and him, and headed downstairs. The air was crisp, the sky a pale winter blue. Ethan looked up as she approached, his eyes warming. "Thought you'd be on the phone all morning," he said, handing her a pair of gloves. "The review called. They can wait," she replied, taking the gloves. They fit perfectly. He studied her, a smile tugging at his lips. "You sure, Miss Adebayo, CEO of Chaos, turning down an interview?" "Miss Adebayo," she echoed, stepping closer, "is learning to delegate." Her hand found his, their fingers lacing. "Besides, the only review that matters is happening right here." He raised her hand to his lips, his breath warming her knuckles. "And what does that review say?" She leaned into him, the scent of earth and apples, and him surrounding her. "5 stars, she whispered. "For transformative growth." The sun broke through the clouds, gilding the gardens, the greenhouse, the man beside her. The world was still imperfect, still harsh, still unfair, but here, now, in the circle of his arms, she felt it, the quiet, relentless bloom of something unbreakable. Not a fortress, not a storm, but a living, breathing thing, rooted, resilient, real. They stood there, hands clasped, as the wind carried the scent of snow and jasmine and endless impossible possibilities.